When Lisa handed me $5,000 to follow her boyfriend, I thought it was just another cheating spouse case. But after 3 weeks of watching Daniel, I realized the real monster wasn't the man she wanted me to expose. It was the woman paying my bills. My name is Jordan, and I've been a private investigator for 8 years now. I've seen it all: cheating husbands, lying wives, corporate fraud, insurance scams. You name it. I've probably investigated it. But this case, this one still keeps me up at night, not because of what I found, but because of what I almost helped destroy. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting in my cramped office above the Chinese restaurant on Fifth Street, nursing my third cup of coffee and wondering if I should finally fix that flickering neon sign outside my window. That's when she walked in. Lisa entered my office like she owned the place. Designer heels clicking against my worn linoleum floor, perfectly styled blonde hair that probably cost more than my rent, and a purse that I recognized from the window of that fancy boutique downtown. She moved with the kind of confidence that money gives you, the kind that says the world should bend to your will because you can afford to make it happen. But her eyes told a different story. Red-rimmed from crying, mascara slightly smudged despite her obvious attempts to fix it. She clutched a tissue in her manicured hand like it was her lifeline. When she spoke, her voice cracked just enough to make you want to help her. "I need you to follow my boyfriend," she said, sliding into the chair across from my desk. "I think he's cheating on me." I've heard those words 1,000 times before. The desperation, the betrayal, the need to know the truth even when it's going to destroy you. It's the bread and butter of my business, really. People always think they want to know the truth until they actually have to face it. Lisa told me about Daniel, her boyfriend of 2 years, a high school teacher, she said, who'd been acting strange lately, coming home late, being secretive with his phone, distant during conversations. All the classic signs that every spouse or partner dreads to notice. "He's all I have," she whispered, dabbing at her eyes with that crumpled tissue. "I just need to know if I'm losing my mind or if my worst fears are coming true." She slid an envelope across my desk. Thick, heavy, the kind that means serious money. $5,000 up front, she explained, with another $5,000 if I could prove what she suspected. $10,000 total for what should have been a straightforward surveillance job. I should have trusted my instincts right then. In 8 years of doing this work, I've learned that when something feels too easy, it usually is. When someone's willing to pay double your usual rate without negotiating, there's always more to the story. But Lisa seemed so broken, so desperate for answers. And honestly, I needed the money. My rent was 2 months behind, my car was making sounds that probably meant expensive repairs, and my last 3 cases had been dead ends that barely covered my expenses. $10,000 would solve a lot of problems and buy me some breathing room to be more selective about future cases. So I took the job. I shook Lisa's soft, cold hand and promised her I'd get to the truth about Daniel. I told her what I tell all my clients, that sometimes the truth hurts, but it's always better than living a lie. Stay until the end of this story because what I discovered about Daniel, about Lisa, and about the nature of deception itself will change how you see relationships forever. Sometimes the person asking for help isn't the victim. Sometimes the monster is sitting right across from your desk, counting out $100 bills and crying crocodile tears. What I thought was going to be a simple case of catching a cheating boyfriend turned into something much darker. A glimpse into how manipulation can masquerade as love, how control can disguise itself as concern, and how sometimes the person paying you to find a villain is the real criminal in the story. The next morning, I started my research on Daniel Mitchell. Lisa had given me everything: his full name, address, workplace, even his license plate number. She'd come prepared, which should have been my second red flag. Most clients who suspect their partners of cheating don't have their entire lives cataloged like a police file. But I pushed that nagging feeling aside and dove into the background check. Daniel taught American history at Roosevelt High School, had been there for 6 years. Clean driving record, no criminal history, not even a parking ticket. His credit score was decent for a teacher's salary, no suspicious expenses or secret accounts. On paper, he looked like exactly what he claimed to be: a regular guy living a regular life. Lisa had painted a picture of Daniel during our meeting that felt increasingly at odds with what I was discovering. She described him as secretive, manipulative, someone who was probably living a double life. But every piece of documentation I found suggested the opposite. This was a man who paid his bills on time, donated to charity, and had never even been late on his taxes. Still, I knew from experience that people could hide a lot behind a clean public record. Some of the worst cheaters I'd caught were pillars of their communities on the surface. So I decided to start the surveillance and see what Daniel Mitchell was really like when he thought no one was watching. I positioned myself outside Roosevelt High School at 3:15 on a Thursday afternoon, waiting for the final bell. The school was one of those older brick buildings that had seen better days but still held on to its dignity. Students poured out like water through a broken dam, loud and chaotic, and full of that energy that only teenagers possess. Daniel emerged about 20 minutes later, walking slowly and carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had been with him since his first day of teaching. He wasn't what I'd expected from Lisa's description. She'd made him sound almost sinister in his ordinariness, but watching him interact with a few lingering students, I saw something different. He was patient as a girl asked him about a makeup test, encouraging as a boy showed him something on his phone that had obviously taken courage to share. This didn't look like a man living a secret life. This looked like a teacher who actually cared about his job. I followed him from a safe distance as he drove his 10-year-old Honda Civic through the suburbs. No erratic driving, no sudden stops or suspicious detours. He went straight to a small grocery store, spent about 15 minutes inside, and came out with two bags that suggested he was cooking for one, maybe two at most. His apartment complex was modest, the kind of place where young professionals live when they're saving money and don't care about impressing anyone. I watched him climb to the third floor, unlock apartment 3B, and disappear inside. The lights came on a few minutes later, and I could see him moving around what looked like a small kitchen. For the next 3 hours, Daniel Mitchell did absolutely nothing suspicious. He cooked dinner, graded papers at his kitchen table, and watched what appeared to be a documentary on his laptop. At 9:30, he closed the laptop and turned off the lights. By 10 o'clock, the apartment was dark and quiet. I sat in my car for another hour, waiting for him to sneak out for some secret rendezvous. Nothing happened. The man was apparently asleep by 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. Either he was the most boring cheater in history, or Lisa was wrong about her boyfriend. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. Daniel taught his classes, graded papers, bought groceries, and went home. On Friday night, prime time for cheating spouses, he went to a small Italian restaurant. My heart rate picked up as I followed him inside, convinced I was finally going to catch him meeting another woman. Instead, I watched Daniel have dinner alone with a book propped up against the salt shaker. He ate slowly, occasionally making notes in the margins of whatever he was reading. When he finished, he left a tip that was probably too generous for a teacher's budget and drove straight home. By the end of the first week, I had dozens of photos and hours of surveillance footage that proved absolutely nothing except that Daniel Mitchell lived the most predictable life imaginable. He was either completely innocent or the most careful cheater I'd ever encountered. But Lisa was paying me $10,000 to prove her boyfriend was unfaithful. She wasn't paying me to tell her she was wrong. So I decided to dig deeper, to look for the cracks that must be hiding beneath Daniel's impossibly clean surface. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has something they don't want the world to see. I just had to find Daniel's. The second week, I expanded my surveillance. If Daniel was hiding something, I needed to catch him off guard. I followed him earlier in the mornings, stayed later at night, even tracked him on weekends. What I discovered made me question everything Lisa had told me. Saturday morning, Daniel drove across town to a modest nursing home. I watched through the window as he sat with an elderly woman, holding her hand while she struggled to remember his name. The way he smiled at her, patient and loving despite her confusion, told me everything I needed to know. This was his mother, and she had Alzheimer's. He spent 3 hours there, helping her eat lunch, showing her old photographs, reading to her from a book she'd probably forgotten by the next page. When a nurse mentioned they needed volunteers for the monthly birthday celebration, Daniel didn't hesitate to sign up. Sunday, he tutored kids at the community center, unpaid according to the coordinator I casually questioned. These weren't wealthy kids whose parents could afford private lessons. These were children from struggling families who needed extra help to keep up in school. I ran deeper background checks, contacted former colleagues, even spoke to his landlord under the pretense of a credit verification. Every single person described Daniel the same way: reliable, kind, someone who went out of his way to help others. His ex-girlfriend from 3 years ago told me he was the most genuine person she'd ever dated, and that their breakup was entirely her fault. She'd wanted someone more ambitious, more exciting. The financial records painted the same picture. Daniel lived modestly, sent money to help with his mother's care, and donated regularly to 3 different charities. His phone records showed calls to his mother's facility, the school, and a handful of friends. No secret numbers, no deleted messages, no hidden social media accounts. After 2 weeks of intensive investigation, I had compiled a file that proved Daniel Mitchell was exactly who he appeared to be: a good man living a quiet, honest life. There was no affair, no deception, no dark secrets waiting to be exposed. So why was Lisa so convinced he was cheating? That question haunted me all weekend. In my experience, when someone is that certain about their partner's infidelity without solid evidence, there's usually a reason. Sometimes they're projecting their own guilt. Sometimes they're looking for an excuse to leave. And sometimes they're the ones with something to hide. Monday morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following Daniel to school, I decided to investigate my client. I parked outside Lisa's downtown office building and watched her routine unfold. She arrived in a black Mercedes that cost more than Daniel made in 2 years. Her law firm occupied 3 floors of the city's most expensive commercial district. This woman had money, serious money, which made her willingness to pay $10,000 to catch a cheating teacher even more suspicious. At lunch, I followed her to an upscale restaurant where she met a man who definitely wasn't Daniel. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit. They sat close, touched hands across the table, and when they thought no one was looking, shared kisses that were anything but professional. I snapped photos, feeling sick to my stomach. Lisa was the one having an affair, but it got worse. Over the next 3 days, I documented Lisa with 3 different men. The silver-haired businessman, a younger guy who looked like he belonged in a gym commercial, and an older gentleman who drove a car worth more than most people's houses. Lisa wasn't just cheating on Daniel. She was living an entirely separate life. A life where she collected wealthy men like trophies while keeping a sweet, unsuspecting teacher as her emotional safety net. The pattern became clear. Lisa was systematically destroying Daniel's reputation before he could discover her betrayals. I spent that night staring at the photos spread across my desk. Lisa laughing with her various lovers. Daniel reading to his mother. The contrast was nauseating. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about a calculated plan to destroy an innocent man's life. Lisa was creating a narrative where Daniel was the villain so she could be the victim when their relationship inevitably ended. She'd walk away with sympathy, money, and her reputation intact, while Daniel would be left branded as a cheater. I'd seen this patch before, but never this orchestrated, never this cruel. Lisa wasn't just unfaithful, she was a predator who'd weaponized my profession against someone who trusted her. The moral weight of it crushed me. I was being paid to manufacture evidence against a man whose only crime was loving the wrong woman. Every photo I'd taken of Daniel's innocent activities could be twisted to fit Lisa's narrative. His visits to his mother could become secret meetings. His tutoring sessions could become inappropriate relationships with families. That's when I made my decision. I couldn't be part of this destruction. The next morning, I called Daniel and asked to meet. His confused voice over the phone nearly broke my heart. He had no idea what was coming. No clue that the woman he loved was orchestrating his downfall. We met at the same coffee shop where he sometimes graded papers. When I showed him the photos of Lisa with other men, I watched something die in his eyes, not just love, trust itself. "Why are you showing me this?" he whispered. "Because she hired me to prove you were cheating," I said, "and you're not." Daniel left Lisa that same day. He didn't confront her with dramatic accusations or demand explanations. He simply packed his things while she was at work and left a note saying he knew about her affairs. Sometimes the quietest exits make the loudest statements. Lisa called me 3 days later, furious that I'd interfered with her personal life. She threatened to sue me, to ruin my business, to make sure I never worked in this city again. But her threats felt hollow now that I understood who she really was. I told her I was keeping the photos as insurance and hung up. I never took another penny from her. The 5,000 she'd already paid felt like blood money, so I donated it to the nursing home where Daniel's mother lived. It seemed like the kind of thing he would have done. 6 months later, I ran into Daniel at that same coffee shop. He looked different, lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight he didn't even know was there. He was with someone new, a teacher from his school who looked at him the way people should look at each other, with genuine affection instead of calculated interest. He thanked me for telling him the truth, even though it hurt. Sometimes, he said, the kindest thing you can do for someone is show them who they're really dealing with. That case taught me something I'll never forget. Not every victim looks like what we expect, and not every villain announces themselves with obvious evil. Sometimes the person asking for help is the one you need protection from. If this story opened your eyes, like it did mine, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the person asking for help isn't the one who needs it most. And sometimes the real monster is the one paying you to find someone else to blame.